Hello, everyone. This is Tom O'Connor, the director of the Gulf Coast Legal Technology Center in New Orleans. I am here with Rocky Messing, who is the Senior Program Manager at the Microsoft Legal Department. Hi, Rocky. How are you?
Hey, Tom. I am doing amazing.
Great. Well, as most of you probably know, but simply by way of overview and background, this is the first of the series of modules that we're doing. Hopefully you've looked at the introductory recording that gives an overview of the entire process, but we have been asked to do a series of videos explaining the eDiscovery process for Judge Xavier Rodriguez of the U.S. District Court in San Antonio, who is teaching a course where he will use these videos at the St. Mary's School of Law in San Antonio. And so to that end, today will be the first in a series that will basically work through the major steps in the EDRM chart. And for those of you who are familiar with it, we'll put it up on the screen for maybe the folks who are not. The EDRM, the Electronic Discovery Reference Model, of course, is a way of conceptualizing the workflow of eDiscovery that was developed by George Sosha and his partner Tom Geldman a number of years ago. George always is quick to point out, and we will also, despite the fact that this is a left to right flow chart, it is not meant to present itself as a linear process. This is an iterative process where the entire process or even some of the steps can repeat themselves, but we will be working through them one at a time. And today, in the first, we are going to look at information governance on the far left of the chart. I should point out also that the EDRM now is owned and operated by the Duke University School of Law. George is working with BDO Consulting. I believe Tom has retired, and Duke has taken over the project. These steps all still, however, remain the same, and we're using them really as just our talking points for what Judge Rodriguez hopes to get across. So today we'll start with the first one, information governance, which is really the proactive step in this entire process, where people can get a handle on their documents. It's a way for corporate users, business users, anybody who's involved in this process to actively engage in information governance, which is really some sort of an effective records or data management policy for whatever your records or data may be. And we're going to look at that. Rocky is going to walk us through how that is handled inside of Microsoft Office 365. I'm very excited about the fact that Office 365 is incorporating rather aggressively a number of steps in this entire process so that you have an operating system that allows you to do all of these steps without having to go out and purchase a number of different products. If you have Office 365, the full suite, not just, and I should hasten to point out, we're talking about the full suite of Office 365, not just the email client. But if you have that full suite, you're going to be able to do a number of the things that Rocky is going to demonstrate to us. So, Rocky, if you would, why don't you show us what Office 365 can do for us in the info governance area?
Yeah, and thanks, Tom. I think it's probably also important for us to discuss just one kind of high-level point around information governance. Sure. And that is that, people have been talking about information governance for a long time. And generally people have found that it can be kind of difficult when you actually try to start getting in and figuring out how to manage what of your data needs to be retained, right? Needs to make sure that you keep it around, and what of your data needs to be making sure that you get rid of it. That can be kind of difficult when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it and how it's going to work within a large enterprise system. And one of the things that I love is that the cloud has made that easier. but we still have two kind of different approaches in how to do that. One is a user-based approach, and one is a systems-based approach, and there's some pros and cons to each of those. Tom, any thoughts in terms of kind of the two different approaches and some of the good and the bad?
Well, I think you just said, if I can put my Groucho Marx hat on, you said the magic words, which are large organizations. I've often referenced the law of unintended consequences for what's going on here, which is that although the organizational approach, the first approach you mentioned, is something that I think large companies, internal organizations, maybe even GC offices at corporations will be interested in. The user approach is something that makes this very easy for smaller organizations and or firms to use. So I think it's going to be a choose what is best for you and your organization, because you've got some flexibility here.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the nice thing, is that there is that flexibility here, because we'll start off with the user-based approach and looking at a little what you can do as an end user. And you know, the truth with the end user approach is that you can give the end users lots of different ways to create labels, to say certain parts of our data meet certain criteria, and therefore we either want to keep it or we want to delete it. But the problem there is that users tend to that's not their job, right? Their job is to do whatever they were hired to do by the company in order to make that company money and make that company successful. Okay, so the first step in setting up those labels is going in and naming the label. So in this case, I'm going to call this label important document to the company. And you can name the label whatever you want. And we're going to turn retention on for this label. Now, what does that mean? It means that we're able to set up that any document or email that is labeled with this label will be kept for a certain amount of time. And that could be, I want to set it up just to say, I want to keep this for a month. I want to go ahead and keep it for 15 days. I can say, I want to go ahead and keep it for 15 years. Or I can even say, if something has this label, I want to make sure that it's kept forever. And what does that mean, that it's kept? Well, it means that even if the end user goes ahead and deletes this data, or someone else for whatever reason comes in and deletes this data, on the back end of Office 365, that data is still going to be kept. And from a discovery standpoint, it's going to be there to be able to be searched and found at a later point. That makes sense?
Yes, and I think it's important to emphasize that this is the point where you're setting up rules to keep things, to retain things, to make sure the documents are not going anywhere.
That is correct. Now, I could also do the reverse. I could say, if it has this label, then if it's more than a year, then I want to delete it from the system. So actually, to make sure that that data is going to get deleted and removed after whatever time frame that I say. Or I can do a combination. I can say, I want to keep it for 3 years, and then after that time is done, I want to make sure that that data is removed. Or I want to make sure that the data is removed, but only after a specific person in my company, it could be a compliance officer, it could be a business manager, whoever it is, actually reviews that data to confirm that that data should be removed. Or I could just say, you know what, after that 3 years, then it's whatever the natural course of that document is. So if the user deletes it, it's deleted. If they don't delete it, it's kept.
Right.
So I've got that flexibility to really create a policy however I want that policy to be created.
Yep.
Now, the other thing is that we know that the timeline for when a retention should take place does not necessarily go after when it's created. It can go by, if I might be using this document up until last month, even though it was created 5 years ago. So I can change that to say that I want the retention or the deletion to the timeline to start ticking, right? The clock will start ticking based off of either when it was created, when it was last modified or edited, when the label was applied, or I can even tie it into an event. So for example, I can have it tied in where if an employee leaves the company and in my HR system, I flag that that person is now an ex-employee, then that event automatically triggers the label and the retention to take place.
Right.
The last piece in the setup here is that I can go ahead and I can also say that this specific label is going to be used for records management, where if something's labeled as a record, it has a little bit of a different set of rules, where, for example, I can't remove the records label once it's been designated as a record, and that data is going to be kept no matter what else happens to that data for whatever the time period of the appropriate records management in the records management plan is. So I could go ahead and do that. For right now, we're just going to go ahead and set this up to keep this data for 3 years, and we'll go ahead and create it. So again, the key here is that I've created, you can see I've created a couple different labels here. And now I have to decide, where is this label going to be applied? So I'm going to publish this label that I just created, and I can either say, well, Office 365, as we went through in the intro, is a big system with lots of different productivity applications. I can say I want it to apply to all of those, or I can get a little bit more specific. I can say, you know what, this specific type of label, it only applies to email. So I'm going to turn off everything but email. I might go in and say, well, this actually only applies to a specific user in email. So I can come in here and pick specific user or groups of users and apply the label in email just for them. Or I can, again, just come in and say, well, this is actually for both OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, whatever it might be. So I've got flexibility there to deploy the labels to only the specific users and the specific applications that I want. I'm going to go ahead and name this policy the important doc label policy. Everything looks good. You can see here that it does point out that it can take up to 24 hours for that label to apply, and right, that only mailboxes that have at least 10 megs of data will actually see the labels. And in a corporate environment, that's generally going to be every mailbox. But from a performance standpoint, because you'll sometimes have a lot of testing mailboxes, other things, it's important to at least know that if you have less than 10 megs of data in that mailbox, you're not going to see those labels.
Right.
But I will go ahead, I'll publish them. Yeah.
If I might, Rocky, just to interject, I like the way this is so flexible. You pointed out how it can drill down into mailboxes. Suppose I set up a label and then, it often happens, a month or so later, I find out that another custodian really should be added in there. Easy to do. Go back in and add somebody to that label, or add the label to another user. Yep.
Open it up. Go back in here to edit the locations, and just go ahead and choose that other user where it needs to apply to.
Perfect.
So you can modify them. You can set up a new policy just for that specific user if you needed to. If you didn't want to, for whatever reason, touch this existing one, But yeah, it's very easy to come in here and just go ahead and change those labels and set them up. It's also just important that not to get confused, that there's also such a thing as a sensitivity label. And the difference there is that the sensitivity labels will show up in the same way, where a user can go ahead and apply the label, but the sensitivity labels allow you to do things like encrypt the data, or to apply a watermark to the data or a footer to the data, things like that. So it's less about keeping the data, but it's still good in terms of managing your data and being able to search for things later that match certain criteria.
Okay, that's great.
The last thing I wanted to show here on the labels is, we kind of mentioned in the beginning that relying on your end users to actually apply these labels can at times be tricky. And since it's not their job, whether they do it right or not can actually be a challenge, especially in larger organizations. So one other thing that I can do, and this only applies, last time we talked a little bit about the licensing. This applies only on the highest level of licensing, the E5, yes, or if you have advanced compliance. So,
and can you, just for the benefit of users who perhaps haven't looked at the first video, could you just explain that difference real quickly?
Yep. So E3 gives you all of the applications, Word, Excel, et cetera, and storage and the ability to do a lot of the things manually, such as the application of labels or the ability to do eDiscovery searching or apply a hold. E5 and the advanced compliance SKU, those add on a lot of the automation and the more advanced features within these tools.
Right.
So for example, here, I can go ahead and I can say I want to take that label and I want to apply it either to any data that has specific type of sensitive information in it, or if it has a specific word or phrase. So on the word or phrase size, I can come in, I can go ahead and type in whatever words and phrases I'm going to be looking for. On the sensitive information, I can come in and we've got a whole bunch of different types of automatically set up sensitive information types that this can look for. So I can go ahead, obviously for the important document to the company, that's not what I'd be doing. But if I'm trying to find credit card information or user PII, I can apply a label for user PII based off of it automatically finding different types of PII.
Right.
So again, that's the way that I can automatically apply that data, the label, to specific sets of data.
Gotcha.
Now, all of this again was on the end user to do. The other way that we can apply retention in the system is by going ahead and creating not a label policy, but just a generic retention policy. So here, I'm going to create an overall retention policy. I'm going to keep data for this one is only going to apply for 3 years based off of when the data was last modified. And I'm going to apply it everywhere. So I'm going to say that this data, it's not going to be up to the end user to apply a label. No matter what, if data is in Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint for any user, that data will be kept for 3 years.
Okay.
So as simple as that, I have just gone ahead and created this policy, which will go ahead and make sure that all of that data for every single user is retained. A lot of times you would have seen a similar type of action with the journaled emails where people would journal email out to another archive system. Yes. Well, this obviates the need for that, because now instead of having to create a second copy in a second system that I have to make sure that I'm upkeeping and maintaining and applying all the appropriate retention to, now I can just keep all the data, all the email, all the documents, whatever it is, where they live, and that's it.
Gotcha.
So I went ahead, I set those up. Because it can take a little while, we actually have another tenant that we'll jump into here just to kind of show what this looks like in an email. Here I've got an email, and if I go to assign policy, you can see I've got a lot of different policies labels that I've set up here already. Right. So I would just go in, I'd click 6-month delete, and you can see it'll tell me on the top of the email that this email has a 6-month deletion policy. Or if I come in here and say, you know what, actually, I want to change that to be work in progress, and therefore it'll be kept for 3 years. And the same applies on the SharePoint side. So here I've got some PowerPoint documents, an Excel spreadsheet. I can actually come in here, and on any given document, I can go ahead and I can apply a label, and you'll see that the labels are based off of what was applied to SharePoint. So I can come in here, say that this is actually confidential. It applies that label, and now that document, even if I go in and I say delete, to me, to the end user, you can see a label stopped it from actually being deleted.
Gotcha.
So that item is not going to disappear because it's been labeled and has to be kept for 7 years.
Excellent.
So all of this was really about how do I make sure that data that I want to have is kept. From an information governance standpoint, how do I track that? So you can see here, I get all kinds of reports. I can see who's labeled data, or how do I apply an overall retention policy to make sure, again, that either data is kept or that it's deleted after a certain period of time, which from an eDiscovery standpoint is going to be really important, because if data is not there, it's not discoverable. So if you didn't do something up front to make sure that the right data is being kept, you can run into a lot of trouble down the road. And conversely, data that shouldn't stick around, you want to make sure that that data actually does get removed from the system. So,
right.
So from an information governance standpoint, those are some of the tools that exist within Office 365. There's a couple others that maybe if we have time for next time, we'll maybe tackle quickly. But from a general data management, data governance, this is really bringing that promise that people have been talking about for really the last 15, 20 years of how to manage the data in a large organization or in a small organization, how to do it effectively.
Excellent. And all part of the Office 365 system. That's again, I said it at the beginning, but I want to reiterate. This is something that's just available to you with that Office 365 license.
Yep, it's all built in.
Excellent.
So.
All right, well, Rocky, thank you very much. I think we'll wrap up this particular module and move on to the next in the series. Thanks again.
Awesome. Looking forward to talking again.